Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition. We are in poem number 234. You're right, the way is narrow. Now, I find this a fascinating poem. We named our series Chats with Emily just because of a poem like this. This is another one of these ironic dialogue, dramatic monologue types of poems. I think Robert Browning, the great poet that she admired so much, is standing behind a whole bunch of this poem. I'll do my best to try to help you understand that. And I think this is clearly a dialogue poem where the intended interlocutor is Christ himself, and more particularly, Emily is, I think, going back to maybe one of the most famous passages of the Gospels. We are all familiar with Matthew 7, and especially verse 12, the golden rule as it's often referred to. It's the two verses that follow that will be focused here for us. They run like this, and again, the King James Version that Emily knew. Therefore, Matthew 7, 12 through 14, therefore all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Now, verse 13 and 14. Enter ye in at the strait gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm really hopeful that you have already played around with our set of introductory comments where, for example, we mentioned something about Browning. We clearly mentioned something as well about the influence of Platonic dialogues and the like here. I think we're coming back to some of those Platonic dialogues again. And I'm hopeful that as well, you've already worked through the preceding 233 poems. We just finished with 233, the lamp burns sure within. Now, no doubt, Emily was very influenced by the enigmatic, brilliant poet Robert Browning. We've given a whole bunch of lectures on some of those dramatic monologues at LearnStrong.net, including, of course, Porphyra's Lover and Last Duchess. Now, this is an interesting poem if we read it as another theodicy. Again, go back to our set of introductory comments. The theodicic question, of course, it's the Miltonic question. Paradise Lost, we've given full lectures at Learn Strong on Paradise Lost. That question of why must there be pain and suffering and evil in the world? And then there's as well the follow-up question of, is heaven really the goal? And should it really be the goal? Notice here the ironic voice telling right away, Jesus, well, you know what? You're right. However, and my Emily group have pointed out that maybe this is Emily's continued distrust of Christianity. We'll read and you decide. You're right. The way is narrow and difficult the gate, and few there be, correct again, that enter in thereat. 'Tis costly, so are purples. 'Tis just the price of bread, with but the discount of the grave termed by the broker's death. And after that, there's heaven, the good man's dividend, and bad men go to jail, I guess. Now, I'm amazed at the last two words of this poem with this I guess thing going on. Because notice, we start from being right, or asserting that somebody is right. Here, of course, it's Christ and his comments in Matthew 7. And yet, by the end of the poem, we're guessing. The skeptical Emily steps forward. We've said in earlier lectures that Emily struggled all her life with having the quote-unquote conversion experience that would bring her from I guess to I know. Notice, we'll begin with the ironic voice of, you're right. Notice, she is telling Christ is the one being referenced here. She's telling Jesus Christ, you know what, you're right about that. You're right. You got that one. I will give you that. You got that one right. The way is narrow, again, back to the reading of a few seconds ago. And, of course, difficult, the gate. Notice how Emily loves to play around with quotation marks around work that's actually technically not always. Notice it isn't difficult as the gate, but rather, what was it? Wide is straight as the gate, wide is the gate. Notice she'll say difficult is the gate. So she loves to play. We've seen this already. We'll see it in more of her poems. She likes to quote by slant, tell the truth but tell it slant. She likes to slant. And few there be. Notice, correct again, And then it's almost like she's engaging in a discussion, again, a chatting with Jesus. And few there be, correct again, that enter thereat. And of course, the thereat is a playing off of the word gate for attempt at rhyme, right? Then she comes from theology to banking, to the stock market, to economic language. Notice, 'tis costly, and I think this is one of the key words of the poem. 'Tis costly, so are purples. That is to say, well, everything that's of value is costly. In other words, she's almost like she's saying, well, yeah, no, duh. Obviously, the hard stuff is always the difficult stuff, the narrow, if you will, gate. 'Tis, she says, just the price of death. Notice again, we're going from theology to money with this use of the word price. Notice this idea of price of breath. Look at all the words that are italicized in this poem, right? In other words, no kidding. All of life is a challenge. All of life is a struggle. Obviously, right? The price of breathing. But the discount, notice now we're in quotation marks, but there is no word discount in the Matthew 7 passage, of the grave, termed by the brokers death. And again, the ironic voice here is remarkable. In other words, well, yeah, I mean, in the end, we live and then we all die. Everybody dies, right? And then the brokers, notice here, will call it death, as if other people don't call it death. And after that, and here we are, right? Here's really where we are, and which is why some of you will maybe read this poem as a theodicy. Okay, so we live and it's really hard. I got it. And then we die. After that, then what? Well, she says it almost flippantly, there's heaven. And here I think she's dancing with Dante's Divine Commedia. We've given full lectures as well at LearnStrong.net on that classic text. I think that stands behind a whole lot of what's going on here. As I've said, I think Milton and Dante stand behind a whole lot of what Emily's whole project is in fact dancing with. I keep saying dancing because there is a sense of a dance, an economic dance, theological dance here. And after that, there's heaven. And then she pauses as if to reflect in her conversation with Jesus, the good man's dividend. Of course, you'll remember that Christ is once approached, and the interlocutor calls him good, and he will say, "Don't call me good. There's none good but the Father." And so here, notice this playing around with the good man versus the bad man. The good man's dividend is heaven. In other words, if you live a good life, you follow that narrow path, you will die, and the good man gets to go to heaven. That's his dividend. Back to the economic language. And bad men, do you notice we go from man to men? Right? It's so subtle. This poem is brilliant. And bad men, quote unquote, go to jail. Now, why she would put dividend in quotation marks, why she would put go to jail in quotation marks isn't completely clear. It probably takes us back to the very first time she does it with discount, when she puts that in quotation marks. And bad men go to jail. Notice all the dashes of this poem. It's a brilliant use of the dash. And then it's I guess. Now, her use of the word guess will set us up for the next poem, 235, where she will say, they say. It's a throwaway, but it's not a throwaway. By the way, when we meet poem 253, I'll just read it for you. We'll come back to this. We'll come back to this brilliant line again. Poem 253. You see, I cannot see your lifetime. I must guess. How many times it ached for me today? Confess. How many times for your far sake the brave eyes film? But I guess, guessing hurts. Mine gets so dim. I'll read that line again. But I guess, guessing hurts. Too vague the face she finishes. My own so patient covers too far the strength. My timidness enfolds, haunting the heart. Like her translated faces, teasing the want. It only can suffice. We'll obviously exegete later when we meet this poem. I also am interested in poem 470. Take a look or a listen to this one real quick. This is another one that is remarkable. I'm alive, I guess. The branches on my hand are full of morning glory, and at my fingers end, the carmine tingles warm, and if I hold a glass across my mouth, it blurs it. Physician's proof of breath. I am alive because I'm not in a room, the parlor, commonly it is, so visitors may come and lean and view it sideways and add, how cold it grew. And was it conscious when it stepped in immortality? I'm alive because I do not own a house entitled to myself, precise and fitting no one else, and marked my girlhood's name, so visitors may know. Obviously, we're talking here about her passing. Which door is mine? And not mistaken, try another key. How good to be alive. How infinite to be alive twofold. The birth I had, and this besides in thee. The poem will challenge us as we finally get there. Well, what are we going to say about a poem like this? I think the argument that she's making is it isn't always clear what the value of pain is, and I think the theodicy question looms behind what she's doing. At 2b, well, obviously the tone is, what would you say, conversational, chatting. The rhythm is interesting here as well. Notice it's not consistent, and it is broken. As if, notice, she injects into the middle of whatever it is she's saying, culminating with, I guess, right? There is as well that shift from Scripture, obviously, clearly Scripture, certainly to Emily's readers, that immediately would recognize the Matthew 7 passage, to, again, language that's economic, the stock market or a banker's language. Now, we're at 3a, as we move to that, and comparisons. There's a couple of poems that we'll come back to when we get there. Another is the famous dialogue poem of 449. Some have said this is one of Emily's most famous poems. Notice the dialogue mechanism here. I died for beauty was what was scarce suggested in the tomb. When one who died for truth was lain in an adjourning room, he questioned softly, why I failed? For beauty, I replied, and I for truth themselves are one, we brethren are, he said. And so as kinsmen met a night, we talked between the rooms until the moss had reached our lips and covered up our names. It's truly a remarkable poem. I'm excited to get to 449 so that we can study it. When we meet poem 475, we'll play a similar kind of comparing game as we see here in poem 234. Doom is the house without the door, 'tis entered from the sun, and then the ladder's thrown away because escape is done. 'Tis varied by the dream of what they do outside, where squirrels play and berries die and hemlocks bow to God. Obviously, this notion of what afterlife is like is one that, can I say haunted? If it didn't haunt, it certainly was a source of intense curiosity for Emily. I wonder what afterlife is really like. Finally, at 3b, how are you going to own a poem like this? One question Emily might ask you is, if there is an afterlife and there is a heaven after you die, well, to get there you have to die. That is to say, you have to leave this thing called living a life. Is that a worthy trade-off? Certainly Emily at times seems to not be totally sure, as in, I guess, and of course all we ever can do with an Emily poem is guess. Hurrah. Thank you.